to our website.
Great. Well, thanks for the opportunity and the kind introduction. I feel like in many ways you gave my my pitch for me, but in order to at least attempt to try to stimulate some conversation, which I really hope we can get to quickly, because I certainly learned more listening than I do talking. I'll try to set the stage for this race a little bit, and I think it's a really important race at a really important time. It's not getting the attention that the presidential race gets, and that's totally understandable. But I want to tell you why we do need to pay attention to the Secretary of State's race. And I think the best way to summarize that is the obvious truth that our democracy is fragile and it is at risk in a lot of ways in a lot of places. That's obvious from the mis and disinformation that's being spread, the violence that's threatened and sometimes carried out, and just the bad policy that's out there that makes it harder for people to participate and vote. And I come at this from a really strong belief that we are a better state, a better society when everyone who is eligible to vote is registered and is confident enough to choose to be part of that. Now, we are obviously very lucky to live in Oregon for lots of reasons. Among them is the work that we've done to strengthen and insulate and protect our systems of elections. This group surely knows this, but Oregon was the first state in the country 25 years ago to make voting at home our norm. That's one of the reasons that we are lucky to have the highest rate of voter participation in the entire country. You might hear a different story from the Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve Simon. We have a good-natured argument about this. We are the top in the last election. But we should not make the mistake of thinking that achievement is something that's automatic or something we can just assume is going to go forward, because there are people out there, including my opponent, who want to take us in the opposite direction. This is where I'm reminded of what the vice president so often says: we're not going back. So I'll get quickly to my priorities as Secretary of State, but before I do that, I have to just observe that if you set out to find the race in the country with the biggest contrast between the two leading contenders, I don't know if you could do any better than our race right here. If you listened to Think Out Loud on Friday, where Senator Linthicum and I had an exchange, you can see what I mean. Not only is he ineligible to run for re-election to the state Senate because he walked out on the job, not only is he unwilling to commit as Secretary of State to certifying an election if he doesn't like the outcome, not only is he a guy who took a lawsuit to overturn mail-in voting all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Even this United States Supreme Court, by the way, said that's not a case, go away. He was unwilling on Friday, despite 4 questions. I asked him 4 times, did Joe Biden win the election in 2020? He would not answer that question. So yesterday we were in Salem at the Salem City Club, and the debate format there allowed each candidate to ask the other a question. So I said, Senator Linthicum, I asked you on Friday 4 times whether Joe Biden won the election, and you refused to answer. But I think this is a key element to the responsibilities of the Secretary of State's office. So you've now had the weekend to think about this. I want to ask you again, did Joe Biden win the election in 2020? And again, he wouldn't answer. So I said to that crowd, as I will say to you, I think people need to take that into account as they consider the vote for Secretary of State, because that is a key element of the responsibility. So hopefully I can dispense with him. And my colleague Ian, our deputy campaign manager, has just put a link into the chat, which allowed us, where we were able to kind of document in a sort of fun way his refusal to answer that question. And if you're inspired, we would be thrilled to have you spread that word and share that demonstration. But what I want to do is bring the stability and professionalism I've built at Treasury to an office that I think really needs it. And for me, the priorities are about making sure that we're defending that election system and making it easy for people to vote, convenient for them to vote. But as the introduction also mentioned, the Secretary of State is the auditor for Oregon, and we need to make sure that tax dollars are being spent wisely and effectively so that we get the results that we need and want in Oregon. And Oregon also has every business that operates in Oregon register with the Secretary of State's office, so we can make that system more convenient and turn that office into a partner for entrepreneurs and businesses that are trying to hire more people. These are all really important things. And for me, the priorities when we get to the Secretary of State's office will be really clear about building confidence in the office and in government more generally by establishing new standards for transparency and ethics, making sure that those audits are driven not by political agendas or predetermined outcomes, but by realistic assessments of risk. And of course, defending our system of elections, not letting anyone undercut faith in our systems, not threatening people. We've got work to do to live up to the values that bring us together as Oregonians. But I am convinced that we all believe that everybody deserves a fair shot. That diversity is not something to be made fun of or derided. It is a real and tangible source of strength and resilience, and that we're all committed to liberty and justice for all. So that's the sort of thing that animates me, that inspires me to keep working in this race. As we've already noted, it's just 3 weeks left. Everybody's going to have their ballot. So as you vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and you vote for Janelle Bynum or Andrew Salinas or Val Hoyle or Suzanne Bonamici or Dan Ruby, you will not forget that the third race on your ballot is going to be the Secretary of State's race. And hopefully I can earn your support and your assistance between now and then in spreading the word. So hopefully that generates some questions and some conversation. I appreciate you giving me a chance to be with you, and look forward to hearing what's on your mind.
Thank you, Treasurer Read. And first of all, welcome back to COIN.
Thank you.
You're always a welcome guest here, and we enjoy having you.
Appreciate
COIN
it.
has endorsed you as
Thank you.
Secretary of State, as you probably know. And so this is really about how to get out the vote for you
Let's
tonight.
go.
Yes, we do have some questions to help folks do that.
Great.
So top of mind right now for a lot of people is protecting election workers and safeguarding the ballot box from threats by MAGA
Yeah.
and folks like your opponent. So when you are Secretary of State, how will your office work with other state agencies to assure protections for our workers and our ballots?
Well, the ballot protection question really is one that allows us to and requires us to partner with county clerks. I've talked to about 25 of the 36. And the interesting thing is that everyone has a different circumstance. Some of that, stems from the physical setting of the county. Some are relatively urban, some are quite rural, some have significant resources, and some are literally a one-person operation. So I think the Secretary of State needs to be a visible and vocal advocate to make sure that those county clerks have the resources and the protection they need. It's going to look different in different counties, but you can count on me to be a presence in urging the legislature, and we've had good success with this in the Treasury, to make the investments that are needed to deliver the results that people want and need.
Thank you. You
Bet.
talked about your opponents just extreme opposition to our vote by mail
Yes.
system here. So and you talked about your support for that, obviously. So what steps would you take as Secretary of State to against these incessant attacks and the disinformation coming from critics of vote by mail? How can we fight this?
I think there are a couple of really tangible options. One, there are several counties, and I don't remember all of them, so they may well be represented on this call, who have the option for voters to participate in something called ballot tracks. This is a brand name, so I'm not endorsing that so much, but it's an illustration of a technology that really makes a difference. And if you're in one of those counties, urge you to opt in. What it means is that you get a series of notifications by email or text or both. The first one is when it says your ballot is on the way, it's in the mail. The second one, after you've returned your ballot, says your ballot has been received, whether that's by mail or in a drop box. And the third one, which often follows the second pretty quickly, says your ballot has been accepted and your vote will be counted. Each of those steps, I think, increase confidence. And if you don't get that note, it's a notification or a reminder that something may have gone wrong and you should intervene. Those things really help people understand what's happening and build confidence. And in those 25 conversations I've had with county clerks, the only reason I've been able to discern that every county doesn't do it is cost. And also, it's not so expensive. So I would like to make sure that every county has something like that in place for voters to know where their ballot is in the process. The second idea that I would like to pursue, I've read about in several counties in California, is the concept of a ballot ride-along. We're probably more used to that term in relation to law enforcement. But these counties have had success in inviting people, skeptical or enthusiastic, to follow the path that a ballot does and learn about all the procedures and protocols and controls that are in place. It's a little bit like knocking on doors or making phone calls. It takes a while, but it's very durable in that people who've had that experience are much more capable and confident and willing to tell the story to their friends and neighbors and family about what's going on with ballots. And I think that really helps solidify and insulate the process and people from the mis and disinformation that's out there.
Thank you. I've been down to some of the uh, election places where they're counting ballots on election time, and
Great.
Republicans always turn out in mass, and I can tell you in my county at least, it's kind of intimidating to the election workers to have them show up there and raising questions, making notes. I don't even know what they're writing down. So um, I I think it would be very helpful to have some kind of uh, presence of the Secretary of State or some kind of information that's put out there to try to quell some of this disinformation.
Yeah,
Um, so I have to ask you about an issue that's come up with the automatic voter registration, where some
you bet.
non-citizens were inadvertently registered to vote when they got driver's licenses or state IDs. Can you
Yep.
comment on that and what steps you see as necessary to correct this?
Yes. So as someone who really believes in what we're trying to do with this, which is to make sure that everyone who is eligible is registered and chooses to vote, I am as mad and frustrated about this as anyone. So I've said from the start, I'm glad that these errors have been uncovered and that they are finally getting the attention that they deserve, but I'm appalled that they happened in the first place. And we just cannot accept continued mismanagement from DMV and the Secretary of State's office on this. So I think what we have to ask is whether the policies and procedures that are in place are consistent with the aim, which I already described, making sure that everyone who is eligible is registered and getting as close as we can to that, and giving them the confidence to vote. The second category is to determine whether the execution is in line with policies and procedures. What we know now from the DMV's own after action report is that we've fallen short in both of those categories. So I'm glad that the governor has initiated an external review, and I think that review needs to focus on both of those categories: policies and procedures on the one hand and execution on the other. People need to be held accountable. And if that review does not accomplish those aims, I can guarantee you that as Secretary of State, that will be my first order of business.
Thank you.
But
Can you comment on the ranked choice voting ballot measure Oregonians will vote on this month? County clerks oppose this measure because of the difficulty apparently in administration. What do you say about that? And what steps would your office take to assure a successful rollout in 2028 if this measure does pass?
yeah, I think I would start with my own feelings about it are that anytime we can do something that gives people more confidence that the nuances of their preferences are better reflected in their ballot, that's a good thing, and we should try to make people feel like they should vote. But you're right, and I guess I would refine slightly. Um, I would characterize the position of those clerks a little bit differently. In my conversations with them, I didn't hear opposition. I heard concern, and concern about whether there's adequate time and resources to do the preparation and the execution. Because I think we can all agree the worst possible outcome would be for the measure to pass and be followed by a bad implementation. The promise of it to be not met with good execution would be a really bad outcome. So as much as the clerks said we have concerns, I was heartened to hear them follow that with the statement of, but we'll figure it out. So if it passes, I would view my role as Secretary of State being the advocate to make sure that those resources are in place for the clerks to get the implementation done really well. This will come while there is no certainty on what the outcome of that question will be, we do know that the next Secretary of State will have the responsibility of implementing campaign finance reform that was passed by the legislature, and that too will be a really significant effort. So one for sure, two potentially really important and challenging implementations on the horizon. And I would also say the other challenge that ranked choice voting does not address is what I think is a huge problem, and that is that the largest segment of voters in Oregon, those who have chosen not to affiliate with a party, do not have a role and a voice in our primary system. I think in the long run, that is unsustainable. So as we implement campaign finance reform, as we answer the question about whether we want to have ranked choice voting and implement that, I think we'll have to continue to grapple with the fact that a large portion of our fellow Oregonians don't have a way to participate in the primary system. We're going to have to figure that out as well.
Would you favor a move to an open primary system?
There are a lot of ways that we could deal with that question, and we should have a robust conversation about that. While we think about that, there are two other things that are probably worth keeping in mind. Colorado has an interesting model, which is a little bit crude or clumsy in some ways. They call it the thick envelope primary, and what they do is, as people may know, is that if you are an unaffiliated voter in Colorado, the state sends you both the Republican and the Democratic ballot, and you get to choose which one you return. If you return both, neither one of them count, but it gives people that choice. That's something to consider. And in the short term, we could address at least some of the challenge by extending the deadline by which people have to choose a party if they want to affiliate. So one clerk told me that the largest complaint they get is people coming in having been automatically registered and not picking a party, saying there's been a mistake. I needed the Republican ballot or the Democratic ballot. And the clerk then says, sorry, the deadline has passed. But this clerk also observes that it wouldn't be any logistical or workload challenge if that deadline was later. The clerk could say, you wanted which one? Confirm, allow them to change their affiliation and print them a ballot on demand. That's really important, I think, for someone whose first voting experience in Oregon or first voting experience ever would otherwise be kind of unpleasant. Let's do what we can to give them a positive experience and make them a regular voter, and people can continue to make the arguments about why they should affiliate with the party they prefer.
Thank you. I have time for about one more question, so I'm going to make it a compound one.
Okay.
What do you think of the new campaign finance reform law? We talked about this a little bit when you were here before. And what role would your office play in implementing and enforcing that new law? And I guess the second part of my question, that's really three parts, but what do you think about public financing for campaigns?
Well, that is a lot in one. That's a triple
It
compound
is.
question. We can also go to lightning round if you want to keep going. I've got time, but I know you have a complicated agenda as well. So campaign finance reform, I think, is a positive step. Certainly, the values of reducing the influence of money in politics is something many of us share. But the devil's going to be in the details. It's going to be really important to focus on those details and the good implementation. And I think it's very likely that we will have to go back to the legislature to clarify and refine and continue to pursue that. It is not going to eliminate money in politics, and we will likely see a lot more of what other places in the country see in terms of independent expenditures. So transparency about those expenditures is going to matter as well. And public financing is also intriguing, but like the others, the details really matter. And I'm confident that we will continue to have conversations about how we try to reduce the influence of money in politics.
Treasurer Read, thank you so much for your time tonight. And
My pleasure. Thank you. Spread the word on that video, please. It's in the chat, and it's pretty stark.
we will. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, I think next Tim was going to do a little cheerleading for us. Go, Tim.
All right, everybody. We have 21 days to impact and affect this election to protect our democracy, to get decent, civil, humane people elected to office. And we have a few very tight races here in Oregon, and we are all really hands on deck at this point. I know letter writing is towards the end. We've kind of got canvassing and phone banking. I mean, I'm sure most of you are probably engaged in those, but it is the final 3 weeks. So let's give it a final push, give it all we've got. And for those of you, who haven't phone banked and or gone out to knock on doors, give it a try. Step out there. There's the way they're organized, there are a lot of people there to support in either one of those two things to help get you comfortable with it. You can even go out with somebody if you'd like in terms of canvassing. There's just some really good trainings available when you get there. So I want to invite, encourage, and cheer each of you in putting these last few weeks, giving it all you've got. So look forward to seeing you. I'm on the canvassing side of things with Bynum and Salinas. Both campaigns are doing the get out the vote. So it's not, prior to this, they were talking to non-affiliated and independent voters, but now it's just Democrats. So the push is just, we're reaching out to our fellow Democrats, encouraging them to vote, because if they show up, we will win. We will win and bring Oregon back into hopefully outside of one district, we would be Democratic representation in the House, and hopefully carry us over the edge for getting a trifecta. So let's do it.
And just to piggyback on what Tim said, we will continue to put out a newsletter every Wednesday where we list as many things as we can, ideas for activities that you can do. I mean, the list is obviously endless, and I'm sure that many of you have other things that you're involved with too. But if you have something that you think would be particularly appropriate for this group, please send us an email at coinleadership@gmail.com, and we will try to include that in our newsletter.
Yeah, everything you need is in that newsletter. So dig in and go after it. Also, the other recommendation for everyone is, and for talking with friends and family and everyone, is to get your votes in early. So try to get them as soon as you can, get them mailed or otherwise get them into the state offices so they can be counted. Yeah, there's a lot of things we could talk about. I mean, there's also the Elizabeth Steiner race, which I think, are we going to talk a little bit more about? No, we've got the amendments right now, but that's a race we really need to support Elizabeth. Teresa, did you?
I was just going to say that we really want to encourage anybody who may be inclined to vote for a working families candidate, especially in the Steiner race, but there's a couple of others in the state. All that's going to do is give votes to the Republican on the ballot. The working parties will not come out ahead. And it's particularly in Steiner's race. Brian Boquist has been blocked from ever running to be a senator again because he walked out, and now he's running for the treasurer position. And I don't know that he's got any campaign experience at all. I mean, finance experience at all. So just use your vote wisely and go blue all the way down the ballot. Thank you.
Okay, I guess it's the legislative team is up. So thank you all for joining. We are, let's see, I'm going to try to find my sorry for just a second while there we go, slideshow. I'm used to using PowerPoint, and Google Slides is a little bit different. So I had to find how to turn on the slideshow. All right, so the legislative team has prepared a very brief, overview of the 5 ballot measures that are going to be on our ballot this year. And those 5 will have a different person from the legislative team who has been, listening to presentations about these ballot measures and doing some research on them for some time. So we're not experts, or at least some of us aren't experts on these, but we would like to share with you what we've learned. So we'll take a quick look at those, and we have a chance to also give some recognition to our faithful and hardworking legislative team members. So first up is going to be Cheryl Conway, who will be talking about Measure 115.
Measure 115, if passed, would amend the constitutions in Oregon so that elected executive branch officials could be removed from office for a variety of reasons. It would require a 2/3 vote from the House to impeach. Then it would be necessary for a 2/3 vote from the Senate to convict. That would then remove the person from office, and they would never be allowed to hold any public office again in the state of Oregon. Next slide, please. A lot of people wondered, why do we even need this? Because we can always recall an elected official. But in fact, there are some restrictions for how the recall can be used. Back in 2015, when Governor Kitzhaber was involved in and had to step down, he could not have been recalled because he was not in office at least 6 months. Same is true with Shamia Fagan. Her fiasco occurred very shortly in her term, and we could not have recalled her either. We also know from experience, recalls are very expensive. They're very time, take a lot of time, cost a lot of money. And because 15% of the total votes cast in the general election are required for that recall, 260,000 votes plus were required when they were trying to recall Governor Brown. So definitely this would give us a faster, more streamlined version of getting rid of some people that we think need to be eliminated from office. Next slide, please.
Well, let's see. Sorry, I'm trying.
That's okay.
There we go.
I can tell you that Oregon is the only state currently that does not have any process for impeaching elected state executives. And other states certainly have found this process useful. Not used it often, but when they've needed it, it's come in handy. We've seen over 100 official impeachment attempts since the United States got going. And some states allow sheriffs, Supreme Court judges, as well as other officials like governors to be impeached. Our measure would only be the 5 executive branches that are elected currently. That would be governor, attorney general, secretary of state, treasurer, and the commissioner of BOLI, the Bureau of
Labor.
Labor and Industry. Right. Now, if we ever added another executive elected official, then they would fall under this amendment as well. And there isn't much in the way of cons, except that, again, it could be used for a little bit of gamesmanship, but the recall is already being used that way. Governor Brown has actually saw 7 different attempts to get a recall. So there'll always be some gamesmanship. But let's go to the next slide and talk about support. The legislature passed it unanimously to send it to voters. We, of course, it's the only ballot measure that we've endorsed. The Rural Organizing Project and the Independent Party of Oregon have endorsed it. Now, the Democrats and Republicans have not taken a position, but there's no organized opposition. So it's pretty cut and dried. I think it's pretty simple, not like some of the other ballot measures you're going to hear about later. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Okay, and next up is Dan Meek to talk about Measure 116.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yep.
All right, first slide. This measure was referred to voters by the legislature. It would amend the Constitution of Oregon to create a permanent salary commission to determine the salaries for all state elected officials. Decisions by the commission would not be subject to review or change by any other entity of government, and there's no judicial review. The measure contains no standards for determining the proper level of salaries, such as comparable to those in the private sector or comparable to those of public officials in other states. And the money to pay the adopted salaries is automatically appropriated from the general fund with no action by the legislature. Next slide. Oh, boom. The pros is that it would likely significantly raise the salaries for state elected officials, and the higher salaries would allow persons of lesser financial wealth to serve in elected offices with less hardship. The supporters state that current salaries for executive and judicial branch elected officials in Oregon are low, which is true. They also state that the current salaries for Oregon legislators are low, which is questionable, as we'll see in a minute. And they say that legislators should not be allowed to set their own salaries because that poses a conflict of interest. Next slide. The cons. Having the legislature set salaries for these officials provides no accountability to voters. It's not really a conflict of interest, it's a congruence of interest that legislators are responsible to voters. The measure could result in unreasonably high salaries, including for legislators, with no way for the salaries to be reduced, except, again, amending the Oregon Constitution. Under the measure, the legislature can arrange to appoint cronies to the commission who will significantly raise their salaries without accountability to voters. And finally, current salaries for Oregon legislators are actually quite high. They are the 8th highest among the 40 states with non-full-time legislatures. Next slide. What's very important, I think, is how the Salary Commission is appointed. Under the measure, the legislature decides how members are to be appointed. Anyone could be appointed except this list: current officers or employees of the state of Oregon, or those currently required by law to register as a lobbyist, or immediate family members of the above. So commissioners can be former state officers or employees or lobbyists, current federal or local government officers or employees or lobbyists, political party officers, big campaign contributors, or even unrelated members of the household of current state officers. Next slide. This is rather unusual. In other states, the legislatures directly set salaries in 34 states. In 11 states that do have commissions, the legislatures can approve or disapprove the salaries. That is not allowed by this measure. Commission set salaries must be affirmatively approved by voters in Arizona and Nebraska. They're subject to voter referendum in Washington, not the case for Measure 116. And some states require salaries to be comparable to those in the private sector for similar jobs or to those in surrounding states. Next slide. This just indicates that the salaries for members of the Oregon legislature are not low in comparison to other non-full-time legislatures. However, salaries for Oregon statewide officials are very low. Our attorney general has the lowest salary of any attorney general, governor 4th lowest, treasurer 3rd lowest, secretary of state 11th lowest. And finally, I think it's interesting to see how Washington established its salary commission by constitutional amendment in 1986. The amendment provided that the legislature would establish the structure of the commission in advance of the vote and couldn't change the structure except by 2/3 vote of both chambers. The legislature established that 10 of the 17 commissioners are selected by lottery from among all registered voters, so there can't be the appointment of a crony commission. The other 7 must have certain qualifications, such as they must effectively be appointed by the presidents of the state's 4-year universities. Measure 116 doesn't have these safeguards. Instead, the legislature can structure and indicate the appointment process for the commission in any way that they want. And finally, the Oregon legislature, in my view, wrote a misleading ballot title and a misleading explanatory statement. They supplanted the usual process for writing those documents and instead wrote the documents themselves. The end.
Thank you, Dan. That was a heck of a lot of information in a very short time. Thanks for your succinctness and your expertise.
I forgot about the supporters and opponents page,
Oh.
which is another 2 down.
Okay. There we go.
There we go. So the Democratic Party and Republican parties have endorsed this measure. No, ROPE. Is that
ROP is
Rural Oregon Project?
Project,
Okay.
right.
Okay. And various minor parties have come out against it, as has the Oregonian. And tomorrow will be the Willamette Week editorial for or against.
Okay, thanks again. Okay, measure 117 is the measure for ranked choice voting, and I'm going to take that one on. So as most of you, this is probably the one that people have maybe heard the most about. Ranked choice voting, if we pass this measure, would begin in 2028. It would apply in primary and general elections for federal and state offices, but interestingly, it would not apply to state legislature. So I'm not quite sure why they exempted themselves from that when they referred this to the voters, but in fact, it would apply to just about everybody at the state level and the federal level except them. Measure 117 would also allow local governments and districts, including counties and cities and school districts, to adopt ranked choice voting unless home rule charters prohibit it. So it might be a little confusing if you haven't spent much time looking at it, but it's really fairly simple. Voters would have the option to rank candidates in order of preference. So you would get to choose who your first choice candidate is, your second choice, your third choice, etc. If you don't want to give any potential vote to any of the other candidates, you can just choose a first choice candidate and leave the others blank. But here's what happens. Once all the ballots have been collected, then they are tallied. And if if one of the candidates has 50% plus one, in other words, a majority, then they win. And that's the end. But if not, then we go back and take out the lowest ranked candidate and take all of their second choice votes and give those second choice votes to the appropriate candidates. And we tally the votes again. And if there is a clear a majority winner in that round, the second round, then that person wins. If not, then we do it again and take out the next lowest candidate and so on until there is one candidate that has more than 50% of the vote. So there are some proponents who say that this type of voting system is more democratic in that it allows for us to make our vote count a little bit more. As you may know, sometimes there's a candidate that you don't think is going to win, but you really want to vote for them. Well, you can at least give them a second place or a third place, or maybe even a first place vote, and then choose someone else for second place. So it does allow, I think, our votes to be heard a little bit more, our voices to be heard a little bit more. Another pro is that we hear that elections with ranked choice voting are less contentious, in that candidates are trying to not necessarily turn you against their opponent because they might want your second place or your third place vote. And so they are a little bit more gracious to the other side. It also may allow for more diverse representation because it might give more candidates a chance to get in the door instead of just kind of the two main party candidates. some of the cons that are provided by opponents suggest that sometimes the candidate that is actually preferred by most voters might not be the winner. And this is in fact the way that some of those in Alaska say happened to their election in 2022, the first time that they used ranked choice voting. Some of the other cons suggest that two major parties could lose traditionally safe seats, depending on the voters' second, third, fourth, or even fifth choices. So it does shake things up a little bit, and that does make the two-party system a little bit nervous. Another con, and this is one that I think county commissioners are most concerned about, is that it would take longer to tabulate the final results. Some of you may remember that in 2022, we waited for over a week to really know what was happening in Alaska. And it was fairly important because the races, the contests for the House of Representatives were so close. And a Democrat did end up winning that race, thanks to ranked choice voting. So let's take a look at who is supporting this and who's opposing it. Rural Organizing Project has endorsed this measure, as have a number of other groups, including the Oregon Education Association, ACLU of Oregon, Common Cause, and several others. COIN has taken no position, as has the DPO and the Independent Party. And I might just explain really that the reason that some of these groups have taken no position is because when they held kind of a vote amongst their like in our case, it was the legislative team. In the DPOs, it was the delegates. I assume the Independent Party also. There wasn't a clear choice. So for instance, in the case of COIN, I know that about 50% of our legislative team thought that we should support this, and the other 50% said they didn't think so or weren't sure. So that's why some of these are no positions. And the opponents in this, whoops, I went a little too far, sorry about that. Include the Oregon Association of County Clerks. They have actually come out opposing ranked choice voting, and the Oregon Republican Party also opposes it. Okay, so moving on to measure 118, and that will be Laura Allen.
Thank you, Debbie. So Measure 118 is called the Corporate Tax Revenue Rebate for Residents, which is basically an effort to implement a universal basic income for each resident who is in the state 200 days each year. And that would be an annual payment that would be made. You may remember the debates and presidential debates in 2016 when Andrew Yang was always talking about offering a universal basic income. His was $1,000 a month for every adult. So this is less and a lot less ambitious, but it's an effort to start that. And basically it would be funded by increasing the minimum tax paid by corporations by 3%, only for those with sales above $25 million annually. And the estimate from the proponents is that this would give each person who's resided in Oregon more than 200 days each year $750 annually. And the idea of a universal basic income is to put everybody at a baseline, and then from that you would have the freedom to build your own life and take care of your own needs without government interference. That's the theory behind this type of thing. So Alaska was the only state that I could find that offered a rebate program like this. But Alaska has a lot of oil, right? So they have oil extraction taxes that are, I come from a state with oil, Texas, and so there's always these extraction taxes that other states like Oregon don't really have that can pay for a lot of things like this. So in Alaska, they are able to offer each person $1,200 a year in what's called a universal basic income. And we also saw this during COVID when the federal government gave each of us, I believe the checks were $1,200 a person, a one-time payment. So it's kind of it's kind of like that theory. So go on to the next slide, Debbie. So the pros, and I'd be interested in anybody's thoughts on this. I'm not an economist or have really no understanding of whether this would be successful or not. So I'd be interested if any of you have more information about it. But under the Oregon proposal, there would be no loss or reduction in your federal benefits, because the state would be required, once the Oregon Department of Revenue collects the money, the State Department of Human Resources would then be responsible to go through and seek waivers or exemptions for each person who might receive federal benefits that would be reduced or cut if they got a rebate or a universal basic income from the state. And I think this is where some of the problem that the Democrats and Governor Kotek have with this would be a lot of effort by the state government, and it would cost a lot for the state to administer it. Though the administration costs would ultimately come out of the rebate money, the state would still have to make up the amount of the benefits. For example, if you were getting federal benefits that would be cut by this, then the state would make that difference up, if that makes sense. And that could be kind of costly for the state. Another theory behind this, and I think Andrew Yang made this point quite a bit, it would recognize contributions by people that have economic value but aren't paid jobs, like people that stay at home and take care of a child with a disability or an elderly parent, those kinds of things that have economic value to our society but don't get paid. So, and the idea is that we would be by making direct cash payments without all of the government red tape and the government oversight, that it would be more effective and streamlined than having all these services. And the proponents say this could reduce child poverty by 26%. I have no idea if that's the case, if that would work. It's $750 a person a year. But that's the idea of getting started. So the cons against this, and I've alluded to some of them, the governor and many of our state Democratic leaders believe this would increase the state budget, and it could put at risk some of the state-supported services for working families. Businesses, of course, oppose it as the Republican Party does. They believe it would make Oregon less competitive for business by raising these taxes. But that's always an argument against taxes. I don't know how much that would make Oregon less competitive. And as I've said, it's not clear what the long-term effect of this would be on poverty and whether it would truly reduce the need for these services that we offer now through the government. So this program, if it passed by the voters, it would go into effect immediately. It would go into effect in January. And the Oregon Department of Revenue would begin collecting this tax and begin administering it, and so that we would all get $750 sometime next year. So there are opponents to this that I've alluded to. I think that's the next slide, sorry. Business, of course, Tina Kotek, but also many Democratic leaders have come out against this. And I think we've taken no position on it, and the Democratic Party has taken no position on it. Rural Organizing Project and the Independent Party have all taken no position on this measure, probably because it's just so unclear as to what the ultimate effect of this would be.
Thank you, Laura. And last but not least, we have Measure 119, and Jeff Hammerland is going to talk about that. And I'm not sure is anyone else seeing those lines?
Very interesting artwork.
Yeah, I'm not sure how those got there, but
it looked like somebody that's here on our call was drawing on the. It makes no sense though.
I don't know how that can be done, but yeah. I hope whoever is doing it will stop.
Oh well. Well, this is the last one, folks. Measure 119. Unionization of the cannabis workers. We all drew straws, and I got the cannabis straw. I don't claim to be an expert on cannabis, but I won't also claim that I, like some politicians did, that I have never inhaled. So here we go. Where did this come from? Well, it was the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, Local 555. They led the effort. It was successful to get this measure on the ballot. And it was because a very nearly identical bill failed in the legislature this last session. It was kind of roadblocked. And so they actually tried to take that person out. In a recall, that didn't happen, but they were successful in getting us on the ballot. So what does a yes vote do? Well, it requires the cannabis business industry to submit to the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission a signed labor peace agreement. That's the keyword, peace agreement, requiring that the business would remain neutral when labor organizers communicate with their employees about collective bargaining rights. So another way of saying that, my next bullet, cannabis business, including retailers and processors, must allow their employees to organize and speak out without fear of retaliation, pretty much like any other union business relationship. Now, there are a number of other states that have similar measures: California, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, and Virginia. Frankly, sometimes I've seen some of those states not listed and in what would seem to be proper Ballotpedia and things like that, and other times they were. So I'm not entirely sure, but at least I know 4 of those states have similar measures, and probably all of them. Next slide, Debbie. So what are the pros? Well, this comes right from the campaign literature. Key points there: workers should have the freedom to unionize their workplaces. And this is the key point here. Because of the confusion and the fact that cannabis is still federally illegal, there's enough confusion for anti-union employers to skirt the law and retaliate against efforts to unionize. So that's what they're concerned about. They're concerned that employers which would try to fight a unionization would potentially be disciplined or fired, or the business would simply not recognize them. They feel that there's a loophole there and it needs to be filled. They also mentioned that several workers, in fact, one piece I said a number of workers, I don't know how many, have died already due to easily preventable accidents that would have been addressed, they feel, if safety precautions had been made through a unionized effort. Next slide. Here are the cons. Our good friends for the Taxpayer Association of Oregon, you could almost guess what they would say here. Oregon's legal shops pay high taxes. They have extreme red tape and cannot compete against untaxed and unregulated illegal pot farms that use human trafficking slave labor. If passed, 119 would likely cause labor costs to spike and hurt the fragile industry. Republican Party says pretty much the same thing, but they focus on infringing on First Amendment rights. And they frankly don't like the fact that it would allow workers to unionize. They don't want that. Other sources, maybe I would say more cogent sources, raise concerns about the fact that the Oregon's cannabis industry is not in great shape right now, and so they're concerned that it would be potentially devastating to the industry if unionization were allowed to occur. Next slide. Here are the supporters. Of course, we've got a lot of unions, not just UFCF, but some other unions as well. Quite a few elected officials, including our previous speaker this evening, Tobias Read, Christina Stevenson, the Labor Commissioner. You can see all of them there. That's all of as of about noon today. There might have been some more since then. We have some advocacy groups who have taken a position on this: Pecan, Oregon Center for Public Policy, and East County Rising. The Democratic Party of Oregon and the Oregon Workers' Parties have both endorsed the measure. COIN and IPO have not taken a position, as we know. Of course, the opponents are the Republican Party of Oregon, because it supports unions, and the Taxpayers Association of Oregon. Are there any more slides? Let's see. Can't remember. That might be it. Oh, that's it. Questions? Hey, I went pretty fast, didn't I, Debbie? Pretty good for me.
You did. Everybody did. We are done, and I wanted to take some time to open it up for any questions. Not that as I said, we are experts, but If we can't answer them, perhaps someone else on the call today can answer them. So if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it.
I'm curious why they focused on the cannabis industry and not all of the pickers and other field workers that do so much of the labor in the state. It doesn't make sense
Good
to me,
point.
only cannabis.
Well, yes, and it's interesting that Pecan and others supported it. Who would be
So
group
I
you'd
think
expect to be supported.
part of the answer to that is that other industries are supported by federal labor laws, but because cannabis is still federally an illegal drug,
Right,
there's just, it
right.
hasn't gotten
It's
the
in that
same
gray area.
support. Yeah.
It's in the gray area, and their concern is that, you know, they just don't have the standing without very clear guidance on this because the federal law says it's still not legal.
Other questions? Or comments? Do any of you have some, thoughts or positions about these that you'd like to share? This is for your education because, ballots come out tomorrow, as we keep reminding you, and the purpose of this tonight is to help you be as ready as possible to vote on day one. Oh, there's a question. Has Jeff come to his own conclusion on 119?
Yes. Well, we were given clear guidance from Debbie, our leader, to not take a position.
No, this is
So, but
during the
now that I'm
presentation.
being asked the question, I guess yes, I have decided based on the research here that I will support this measure. I frankly didn't know anything about it until I was given the assignment, but it was fascinating to learn something brand new. I mainly deal with energy policy and climate policy, and this was a little different here, but I think it makes sense that the industry is need of the labor unions are in need of the support.
Tim?
Yeah, ranked choice voting, I'm a little confused why the legislature is not doing it, and how would they become involved in ranked choice voting? Is that another effort? I mean, I'm a little confused why they, chose not to be part.
Yeah, my understanding is that, they referred this to the voters, so they could refer it in whatever form they wanted. And they recognized that there was a big movement in Oregon to push for ranked choice voting. And so rather than perhaps letting it go to a citizens initiative where the people, then the citizens would get to decide how they wanted ranked choice voting to look in Oregon, they took the action, kind of a preemptive action, to say, okay, well, we'll put ranked choice voting before the voters, but we're going to exempt ourselves from it. And I think we'd have to ask some legislators about why that happened, because I actually don't know. Dan, do you know anything about that?
Not specifically, no.
But how would we be able to change it such that it's ranked choice voting? It's ranked choice voting, right, for everyone, not just.
So
would that be initiative?
We could, we could lobby them to, pass another bill that would refer to the voters again. So this is well, actually, I'm sorry, this isn't a constitutional amendment. So no, it's not.
So the legislature could adopt ranked choice voting also for itself, but it did not wish to do that.
So Debbie, so Carolyn has asked if Laura had a conclusion on 118.
Well, I told Debbie initially I was going to vote for this just because I'm a Democrat and I like to give people money. But after reading it, I thought maybe we should start with a more measured approach. And I put this in the summary, which is on the COIN website. Maybe start with some pilot projects and see how it works, and see how people respond to it. And I appreciate the comments, by the way, on I do understand the Alaska system is different. It's a permanent fund, but that is always referred to as an example. That people point to that as an example of where UBI sort of takes place. So I actually don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm leaning against voting for it when I get my ballot.
And I would just point out that the various economic analysis done by the Legislative Revenue Office assumes that the amount of the rebate is about $1,600 per person per year, not $750.
Well, but some of the proponents in their literature have said they think it would only be about $750. So that's why I erred on the side of the lesser number. But yeah, you're right. It does say that.
And I agree it would be $750 because the reason that the Legislative Revenue Office thinks it would be $1,600 is that they assume that the new tax would apply to S corporations and not to C corporations. But the way I read the text of the measure, it would apply only to C corporations. So I think they're basically doubling the impact of it.
Yeah.
I did put a link to our COIN endorsements page in the chat. I see somebody asked for allowing for copying of the chat. I'm not sure. No, not
We
being
can
a Zoom expert
save
here.
the chat and then maybe put it in the newsletter. That's a lot. I don't know. I'll save it now though.
Is there a way that we can allow anyone to
No, we
save
would
it?
have to lift it from our Zoom and share it like a copy
Okay.
and paste, I think. And someone else wanted the slides, but I think
will
that
say-
was answered.
Yeah, we
So
are
folks,
taking notes. Melinda has been taking notes on this, and it's also
Yes.
been recorded. So we will provide that to you in our newsletter that goes out tomorrow. And we can certainly save the chat as well, and like just,
We can put it at the end of the
Define-
notes, and there's already the
Just-
link to the slide deck and to that important video clip that Tobias Read was talking about.
yeah,
will this be on the YouTube?
we will,
The COIN.
Or the
we
web
haven't
page.
been recording these because the other candidates didn't want us to. So,
Oh.
but Tobias Read said it was fine. And of course, we have this information about the ballot measures. So we will put it on YouTube, and we will put the link in the chat to the recording.
So Debbie, I have a date with my wife and she is coming down and wondering why I'm not there. So I'm going to take off, but good to
Thank
see
you,
everybody.
Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. And this is our last meeting before we vote. We're going to go ahead and sign on at just before 8 o'clock on election night for anybody that wants to watch results with us. But the biggest thing that we want you to walk away with tonight is that you vote on the first day you get your ballots. It really helps all the campaigns and all the phone calling. It makes it so much easier for the people working on getting out the vote to not have to call you and say, hey, where's your ballot?
Well, those phone bank people that I spoke to today, if they vote on day one, they won't be getting any more calls. They'll be very happy, same as you. So yeah, vote on day one so you don't get the calls, but also so that campaigns don't have to call you, because we know you're going to vote to remind you. So thanks everybody for coming tonight. Thanks for your good questions. And thanks for all you are doing. We saw lots of you talking about the things that you've been doing, from phone banking to canvassing to Neighborhood Leader Project, postcarding. You're so awesome, and we're so proud of the work that COIN has done. And our candidates recognize the work that COIN has done, as does Indivisible. We get occasional shout outs from Indivisible National about the work that you all are doing here. So good job.